Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us again for another episode of Project Sanity. I am your host for the evening, Brandon Sutton, and I just want to say thank you to Nicholas Nowlin of the Takedown with Nick, also on this channel, for filling in for me last week while I went to network, party, and eat food. To Before I get started by introducing my co-host, I just want to say thank you also to the Benjamin Dixon Show channel for allowing us to stream here. And so if you're new to watching the show, if you like what you see, and I know you've only seen me so far, so how could you not like it?
That's probably why I
Subscribe.
don't like it.
We're gonna get started. Uh, Please subscribe, like, share, and we have a great show planned for you tonight. Joining me, as always, is my Socratic life partner, Adair Schmidt. Say hello, Adair.
How you guys doing? I'm sorry you had to, see that ugly mug for the first couple of minutes of the show, but I promise it gets better.
It always gets better. And my producer / second co-host, Richard Green. Well, thank you. Okay, so let's jump right in. So it's only been 2 weeks since President Trump took over, and every time I say that, I want to vomit a little bit in my mouth. But it feels like it's been at least 6 months. Am I right?
It's that meme of the old lady. It's been 84 years. Like, that is what it feels like. Time has gone exponentially fast, and I feel like we're all in our mid-90s.
Definitely, it feels like. Yeah, I really cannot believe how much he's attempted to get done. Because I think that if we really look at the response to a lot of stuff that he's tried or is doing, it's been relatively hostile, he's become he's become the president to reach higher disapproval rating than approval rating the fastest in probably the history since they've been doing that. I know it only took him 10 days. And so it doesn't look good for anybody, right? But I do want to start. So if we were to go through everything that Trump has done over the past 13 days, we'd be here to the end of time. But I do want to talk about something that is going on the other side of the aisle first. And that is, Nancy Pelosi had a town hall meeting 2 nights ago. Nancy Pelosi, for you who don't know, is the minority leader of the House. She was elected minority leader following the election of Donald Trump. She's been the minority leader. She's been a leader for a very long time. 80 years old, so she's got her pulse right on the finger of whatever makes millennials tick. And she was doing a town hall meeting the other day, and she was asked a question by a 20-year-old New York University college student. He went rogue. Trevor Hill went rogue. He had a question planned out, but he changed his question at the last moment from his approved question to this one. So basically, he starts with the premise that the majority of people between the ages of 18 and 29 do not support capitalism. That's from a Harvard poll in April. 51% of people between ages of 18 and 29 do not support capitalism. And so he goes, that's not me asking you to make that's not me asking you to make a radical statement about capitalism, but I'm just telling you that my experience is the younger generation is moving left on economic issues. But I wonder if there's anywhere you feel the Democrats could move farther left to a more populist message, the way the alt-right has sort of captured this populist strain on the right wing. If you think we could make a more stark contrast to right-wing economics. And Pelosi responds with, I thank you for your question, but I have to say, we're capitalists, and that's just the way it is. And she goes on a bit of a tirade after that about, capitalism and the tendency for productivity not following this trends in wages, but it was largely just nonsense, right? So
buzzword soup.
It was word soup. It was it was very obvious that she had not that she had been given a list of pre-approved questions that she had time to think about, and that this question took her entirely out of her comfort zone.
It's not something. Also 80 years old. I'm like, God. By the way, folks, that's what healthcare looks like, and lots of money, a la South Park. And what's the cure for AIDS? Drinking money. Like, I mean, I think that's all they do. They're a Capitol Hill, and it's just like this eternal fountain of youth. Because that doesn't look like your average 80-year-old person, but that just like that. The fact that I'm 24, and she's older than my grandparents. Maybe, but it's almost as bad as Brandon and this misspeak a few months ago. But no, like seriously.
Well, yeah, you got distracted a little bit. I'm talking about baby blood, but it's all right.
People being harvested. Holy shit.
Okay, so
let's.
So let's unpack this, right? So let's talk about the premise of the question. The premise of the question is that capitalism, at least according to millennials, is not working, right? I think millennials as a generation have a unique insight to the failures of capitalism, because we've seen our generation, those between the ages of 18 and 29, have bore the brunt of neoliberal policies that were enacted in the 1980s. We have less wealth, we have higher debt, we have a lower expectancy when it comes to life. Basically, our generation is the first generation to really just do worse than our parents, because we are the first generation to really feel this wave of deregulation hit us, right? Deregulation and re-regulation.
Not even re-regulation. They didn't even actually manage to re-regulate. Every new regulation they've passed since they started this whole deregulation process, there's just been a lot of nonsense about, oh, well, we're going to do these things, but none of them have any, none of it has any teeth, none of it has any bite, none of it's really enforceable. Global warming is out of control. CO2 in the atmosphere is absolutely ridiculous. I remember the big thing when I was growing up in middle school, so the early 2000s, I want to say early 2000s, they were like, hey, there's a hole in the ozone layer thanks to Freon and all these other absolutely just ridiculous things. Nonsense about there's been no re-regulation. We're the first generation to be hit with this idea that, well, hey, if we just deregulate businesses now, when our kids grow up, they can be as poor as we hope they can. We're kind of screwed.
We're screwed.
And rich people just don't understand. They don't want to understand.
Two quick things. Richard, unmute your microphone when you speak. It helps people hear you.
I guess perhaps we've been saved a little bit.
Two, when I refer to re-regulation, what I'm referring to is this dual neoliberal kind of takeover of government. First, we see a wave of deregulation to allow the market to, be free and flourish. And then we see money flow into our government, and the government sort of takes over this corporatist tinge, and they fix the market to siphon money from the poor to the rich in a way that I'm not talking about I'm not talking about the literal piss weak regulations that we have to regulate. I'm talking about the ways in which our legal system has been co-opted to give unfair benefits to the wealthy, not necessarily actual quote unquote regulations, but fine. My general point.
Nothing. Go ahead. I was going to make a chemistry joke.
No nerd jokes. My general point was this. The premise of his question is fair, right? It's basically that America, as a result of this rampant neoliberal pathos, is doing worse. This generation is doing worse. Every generation is doing worse, but this generation is feeling it in an uneven way.
We're the generation that we can't buy a house. Most of us. I do have some millennial friends that own houses already, and then are ridiculed for moving back in with our parents when everything's just kind of been torn to shreds. When we were kids for the most part during the housing crisis, when mortgages just completely went under, there was no way to fix the market. Now we're just kind of screwed. So I think it's more than a fair premise. It's the truth. It is the truth. It's factual, and I think.
So yeah, it's factual. And so this is, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is where I want to get into, right? This is the unmitigated truth. This is simply the reality situation. Maybe not capitalism as a general ideology has led to this, but the ways in which the American government and public system has been rigged for corporations, that kind of rampant neoliberal capitalism absolutely has left us worse.
Let me ask you this. Are you saying capitalism works in theory? Because that's what it sounds like you're saying to me. Is
Everything
it works in theory, but we put it into practice. And I don't know if you got that joke, Brandon, but that's what they tell us all the time about socialism. Well, it's a good theory, but it would never work in practice. Well, capitalism might be a good theory, but we're seeing right now what it's doing to real people, what's happening the world over. What we're seeing with countries like the U.S. being run. I mean, our new Secretary of State was the CEO of Exxon. Was the CEO of Exxon. I mean, really, does it get more corporatist in government than literally bringing over the CEO of one of the biggest oil companies in the world to run your foreign affairs? I mean,
tying several of those things together quickly. Tying several of those things together. Benjamin had a great show on Tuesday. If folks haven't checked it out, make sure to watch it at some point over the weekend or something. But he talked about how it was in reference to the Supreme Court justice that we probably won't have a time to get to, but how the how originalists or literalists or however they want to call themselves, how that the impact of America's legacy of basically favoring white Christian males, and I would add tending towards the affluent, and I think that plays a large role in what you're talking about. What's being discovered today by today's generation is that level of tending towards the affluent went away a little bit during the labor revolution and when unions got popular and the middle class was strengthened, and we're seeing new generations of people being introduced to a corporatist, elitist, affluent tending policy and government that they weren't exposed to before, but black people and other oppressed people have lived with that entire time and saw the difference when the white labor movement was especially successful. Go ahead.
So I'm going to answer your question, Adair. Does capitalism work in theory? No idea, right? So like everything works in theory, but here's the large point I'm trying to make. So two larger points. A, capitalism is an economic theory. It's an economic sort of modality for how you can shape your country's economic system. Pure capitalism, I wouldn't know. We've never had it. I mean, sorry, we did have it we had something very close to it during the Gilded Age, and everyone was poor, and we stopped doing it. So whatever. But the issue is that neoliberalism, the sort of PR branch of capitalism, is an ideology. Right, neoliberalism. It's an ideology the same way. They're not the same way, but in a similar way that with something like Christianity is an ideology, except it's the preeminent ideology of the elite liberals, neoliberalism. And the issue becomes here, right, that this is like Nancy Pelosi is one of the leaders of our resistance, right? She's like of the resistance. She's one of the leader of the approved resistance because she's the Democrat, one of the Democratic Party's long running leaders. And here we have, she's a neoliberal fundamentalist. She's an ideologue. What she's being presented with is not an opinion. It's not really an opinion. It's not really something that is completely discordant from reality. It's not the fanciful ravings of a Bernie bro. It is like, look at the standard of living in America. Look at the latest generation and what is projected that their standard of living will be. And so maybe the path to victory, and not only the path to victory for the Democratic Party, but the path to a better society is to abandon the sort of this capitalist myth, the way the left, the younger generation of the left, and just older leftists have abandoned the capitalist myth. They've seen the flaw in the myth of capitalism. They've seen it be revealed to be just that, right? A myth. And to actually start speaking and legislating to this populist left, and she simply looks at him in the face and says, look, you have all this evidence. You have like the number of people who are dying in poverty, the fact that people are dying because they can't afford healthcare, all of these things, but we're just capitalists. And what I would ask you is this: if there were a country out there that let the amount of people who we have living in poverty that has the sort of social mobility rank that has the ranking within the social economic mobility chart that we do, which is incredibly lower than some South American countries, that has the rate of children in poverty, and we said, hey, look, that country does that or allows that to be the case because of what the Quran says. Liberals would be, oh my God, can you believe that? Those people are irrational and barbaric. But if you just simply say, well, we do it because of capitalism, that makes it okay. And so,
I mean, That's the Democrats right now in the House, the Democrats period almost in the United States government are Reagan era Republicans. They're not actually Democrats. They're not actually liberals. They are Republican light. And we've known this, and you're absolutely right. If this was to happen in a country that was majority Muslim, there would be an absolute freak out about the lack of opportunity that their religion provides. When in fact, in this, it's quite literally just the system, the economic system, A, that we live under, but B, the ideologies that are being espoused by our people at the top positions of power, by these people like Nancy Pelosi, who for whatever reason feel like, well, I can say I'm on the right side of things because I'm socially liberal. That whole idea, that whole fallacy, really, of economically conservative but socially liberal, that doesn't exist. Like, that just doesn't exist. The two are not. You cannot separate the two from each other. You can't be one but not the other. Like, it's just not how things work.
You can be in theory, but we know in practice, if you are economically conservative but socially liberal, if you enact economically conservative legislation, the people who you profess to care about, who are at the bottom of society, bear the brunt of that legislation. So really, what it means is that if you govern to the right economically, but govern to the center left socially, what you simply get is a lot of lip service. You get a lot of people. You get a lot of the upper middle class minorities, or even upper class minorities, seeing a little bit more mobility, but the 90% of them who are, living in poverty or some other, or under the poverty line or within the middle class, they shrink and they disappear because it's not really. That's just. Well, it's the way it is.
It's not designed to make the middle class a thing. Like, the middle class in America is, I think, at this point, rapidly becoming extinct. And I think if we don't change course, I mean, hell, if this administration allows things to continue going the way they are, I think it'll be, the middle class will be gone in 4 to 8 years as opposed to 16 to 20. And it's becoming a thing. Like, I think largely the middle class in America is going to become this thing of legend. This myth that at one point in American society, you too could be, comfortable and not worry about anything. But thanks to the magic of neoliberalism, all of us that aren't already wealthy are kind of screwed in the long run, unless we rapidly change course now. But then you have those arguing, the incrementalists, right? Saying, well, a gigantic ship just doesn't turn on a dime. Well, this isn't a gigantic ship. It's a bloody country. We can enact legislation right now to start fixing these ills, but people are so drunk on this Kool-Aid that it doesn't register.
Exactly. We could, right? We could enact legislation that could fix a lot of these problems. We've heard people suggest legislation, quantitative easement on student loans, things that would help. But the response that people give to that kind of legislation, they'll say, okay, well, why don't we forgive student loans? Why don't we perform a jubilee? Why don't we give some of the money that was lost give some of the capital that was lost in the housing crisis back to the mortgage borrowers? I mean, not the lenders. And why don't we bail out Main Street, not Wall Street? And the answer, it comes in a sort of pseudo-economic, pseudo-scientific bent to it, right? Like, oh, well, because the market can't handle it, and quantitative easement doesn't work that way, and, X, Y, and Z. But really what it is because those things are discordant with my ideology. It's like,
it's what Nancy Pelosi said. We're capitalists.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. Like, that sums it up.
Yes, we could do it, but my ideology is neoliberalism, which worships capitalism, and so therefore, if we did those things, it would be discordant with my ideology. And my ideology has left me very comfortable. And my ideology, along with these issues that they raise, is one of meritocracy. That I'm where I'm at because of my self-sufficiency, because of my work ethic, and you're where you are for the similar reasons. And this is a problem with liberalism in general, or rather, people who profess to be intersectional, but socially liberal and economically conservative, because what they're very good at is recognizing the speciousness, or rather the specious nature of why they can't reach the top, right? Whether because they're LGBTQ, or whether because they're a woman, or because they're black, et cetera, et cetera. But what they cannot realize is that it's just as specious that the people who are under you can't reach your level too. So when they look down, they see, okay, well, I'm here, they're there because of the way they worked, and I'm here because of the way I worked. But the reason I'm not number one is because of these specious social reasons. When it's
like that fascist Milo, like, people, identity politics is the fascist that got shut down.
I know.
Okay,
I know who he is.
Like, I mean, but like, no, seriously, it's this idea. I think I want to say so, but identity politics has been corrupted.
Doesn't make a difference.
It's been corrupted to become a political wrench that you can throw at your opponent, right, and just say, well, no, you're just practicing identity politics. Those things don't affect real life. And then Republicans are like absolutely the first ones to come up with the most outrageous identity politics to try to cover up racism and all this other BS that they have going on. But our Democrats are some of, I think, frankly, the biggest perpetrators of what I call garbage identity politics. Your identity is absolutely immensely important to how you view the world, what you do, and how you feel things should move forward. But on the left, we have this idea that we saw, especially during the primary, you have to vote for so-and-so because of this portion of their identity and ignore everything else about them.
So I do want to change topics, but I want to address what you just said because it's really important, right? And so what people don't remember, and here's a little bit of a history lesson, right? The critique of identity politics, the idea that identity should not matter in politics comes out of the neoliberal movement to begin with, or rather the Reagan deregulation movement. And what it was this. It was this notion that the government had too much power as civil rights era, Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, these acts that were coming out that were basically designed to combat the oppression that was faced by very specific groups. And so people started this critique of identity politics to combat that, but as a guise to strip away some of the government power and allow, for what Grover Norquist said, to allow the government to shrink to the size where it could be drowned in a bathtub. And now it's funny because we've seen it become full circle, right? Where the neoliberals have now adopted this bastardized version of identity politics. Also the right too, but I mean, they're neoliberals as well. Now use this this shallow version of identity politics to justify their own corporate ideas, or rather justify the status quo, because what they'll do is they give this illusion of diversity. They pull out rich black person, rich woman, rich LGBTQ person, and
gay fascist.
What they will say is they'll say, well, hey, listen to this person because they are capable of speaking to the entirety of the issues that the group that they belong to, one of the groups they belong to. They don't talk about the fascists. They don't talk about the fact that they're rich. They don't talk about the fact that they're male. It's like whatever their oppressor is, the group, they can speak for that oppression. And what they does that group, they say, okay, well, this person, this rich black lawyer, this rich black male lawyer can tell you all the problems that black people face, and they really can't. And it's this homogenization of the other. The other is just any other can speak for any other. It's fine. Wow.
It's almost got to the point of parody in which a lot of networks will just do it almost on cue, where if something happens, you can expect, and they have the same people that you know who's coming.
If it's CNN, you just expect Van Jones to pop out.
Yeah,
like Van Jones and Don Lemon. Like that's who they bring out every time. That's not to say that he's a bad person. It's not to say that he's an unlikable person. I'm just saying that's who they bring out, him and Don Lemon. Well, except for that New Year's Eve party where apparently it was quote unquote lit.
Yeah,
so
I mean, sometimes bring out Mark Lamont Hill on CNN to argue with that one cop that's ridiculous. Go ahead.
I do want to transition to topics, right? So I want to talk about. I brought up Nancy Pelosi. Transition. I'm sorry, I get my trans confused. So I want to transition topics, right? I brought up Nancy Pelosi because I've seen this. I think this dangerous trend. We talked about this before the show started. This dangerous trend now that exists, where we have two extreme sides of this coin, right? We have I would say your liberals, your center leftists, your center rightists too, right? Who want to use the existence of Trump to absolve and nostalgize and give and not even forgive, but to raise up every president who came before Trump, right? They want to say, well, Bush is forgiven for his illegal wars, Obama's forgiven for whatever he did, Clinton, other Bush. No one bring up Jimmy Carter because Jimmy Carter was whatever. But basically, if you can't, honestly, Jimmy Carter had for lack of a better word, to stand up to the military-industrial complex and not simply just go to war as soon as someone said, "Hey, those people are dangerous." But he's been painted as a coward, but a lot of times no, he said no to the military, and I appreciate that. But issue is here. The other side, the radical leftists, every time you say something about Trump, right? Every time, and I hate to shout Jimmy Dore, but Jimmy Dore kind of falls in this category too sometimes. If you say something bad about Trump, if you point out, okay, listen, a uniquely shitty president, right? He's cartoonishly evil. He is Saturday morning cartoon evil. And Gaffney and Bannon is like the Mum Ra of his candidate. If you watch Thundercats, he's like the Mum Ra, and Gaffney is I don't know, Lord Zed. They're out there being awful. And what they want to say is, well, look, Trump banned these Muslims, right? But Obama had an extra vetting list and and a visa waiver program, and he did all of these things that are almost within the evolution of what Trump did. They may be the Australopithecus to Trump's human.
Right.
And they want to ignore this wide gap between what Trump is doing and what Obama did. And both sides of this, the people who want to, only talk about what Obama did and not really acknowledge how uniquely awful Trump is, because he is uniquely awful. Don't want to forgive Obama and what? Thank you for being President Obama. Right.
Yes.
And so I want to get your thoughts. I keep rambling. So please, you go first, please.
It's just, it is absolutely a thing. And I call myself a militant leftist, and I don't mind the term at all. But I think a lot of people that aren't, quite as hardcore left as we are would call us the militant left. And a lot of people on the militant left are so quick to respond to anything and everything that Trump does as, well, Obama did this, or Obama did that, or Obama did these things. And I'm like, that's fine. If you want to critique Obama, I'm all for it. I am with you there. I will be the first one to say, hey, you know what? Obama did, here's something that Trump is doing that is absolutely reprehensible. And you know what? Let's expand and talk about history a little bit. You know what? This is a continuation of, not just a continuation of something that Obama may or may not have done, but in often cases, an extreme ramping up. It doesn't have to be one or the other. There doesn't need to be this extreme admiration and just revisionist history written about Obama in the way that we've seen revisionist history written about George W., about Bill Clinton, about George H.W., or especially Ronald Reagan. Good Lord, you can't go anywhere without Republicans practically ejaculating in their pants over Ronald Reagan. You mentioned his name and people just faint. It's horrible, and we don't need to do that with Obama. But you cannot ignore what's going on right now. You can't ignore mass protests at airports. You can't ignore the fact that Trump's Muslim ban was deemed unconstitutional. There was an emergency stay put on that by the courts, and Donald Trump said, you know what, DHS, screw the courts. You're going to do what I say anyway, and we're just going to keep doing the super unconstitutional thing. That's an issue.
Okay,
that's an issue.
And also firing the Attorney General Yates, right? When she wouldn't
defend it.
Yeah. So okay, let me preempt what I'm going to say with this way to understand what's going on. Okay, here, Obama is the system, right? Obama is the neoliberal, neoconservative, corporatist system and all of its follies in one big package. He's identity politics. He's the system, and Trump is the extreme of that system. He is the excess. He is that system on steroids. And if you stand where Trump is, metaphorically, if you stand where Trump is on that spectrum, you can see Obama. Absolutely. You can definitely see Obama. He's not super far in the distance, but he is reasonably far. And and the things that he did that people are referring to, his temporary stay on Iraqi refugees in 2011, I want to say. I think it was also with something with Syria. His the funding of a lot. I'm sorry, the drone bombings of a lot of these places. All of these things.
7 countries, I believe it was.
7 countries, 27,000 plus bombs. Funding Saudi Arabia, who is engaging in a awful legal war in Yemen. All of these things, absolutely terrible. But the system, Trump is so far out of that. And I think also, before we move on, we have to really understand this Muslim ban. And by understand, I say here is how you critique this Muslim ban without sounding like a complete asshole. First thing you don't say, we're all immigrants. No, we're not.
Yeah.
Please stop saying that. It's really disrespectful. I'm not an immigrant. Adair is not an immigrant. Richard's not an immigrant.
Native people are not immigrants.
My family's 7th generation American. We're not immigrants. You're disrespecting the unique situation that they're in. I understand it's empathy. We're not immigrants. You don't need to empathize with them. You need to understand that we have a constitution. Fine. 2, do not accept the neoconservative framing. And by that I mean stop saying that this is only going to radicalize ISIS and create more terrorists. Yeah, it probably will. I mean, they already hate us and they already know that we do stuff like this. But okay, absolutely, definitely. But that's not the reason we shouldn't do it. Right. The reason we should, that's a very neoconservative framing. We don't need to accept that framing. The reason we should do it is A, it's unconstitutional. B, largely they're refugees because of us, right? Because of ISIS.
Immoral.
It's immoral.
It's absolutely immoral to turn people away. Look, it both bothers me and is, I think, absolutely poignant that people are saying we turned away Anne Frank in 1939.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the third thing, sorry, just one third thing. It really does not matter that these are the wrong countries, right? And exactly. These are the wrong countries. These are the wrong sect of Islam. That does not matter, right? And so what we do need to be able to do when we have this conversation, because we definitely have to have this conversation about Obama and George W. Bush and Clinton and this genealogy of how we got to Trump. But we definitely have to be able to identify, okay, what are the things he's doing that are deeply rooted in the culture around Islam and the Middle East that we've been building in years, and in what ways are these things that they're rooted in this culture, but how are they completely unreasonably beyond the pale and extreme? And so let me put it this way. I mean, let me give you an example. Okay, our media has been for the past 20 years very, very Middle East and dehumanizing Muslims, right? Both through explicit rhetoric and implicit apathy towards their suffering, and which kind of justifies it in a certain way. So by that I mean is they've largely homogenized Islam in the Middle East, insofar that it's been okay, well, we're bombing 7 countries, but they are terrorists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They've painted Islam as an inherently problematic religion. If you happen to believe Islam, if you happen to be a worshiper of Islam, you are inherently problematic. And even, let's be honest, the Obama administration, in the way they define terrorist, is an incredibly dehumanizing definition. It's okay, well, if you're a male between the ages of X and Y, you are a terrorist until you are proven not to be one. And so we have this picture within our popular culture of the Middle East as simply a place that is populated, the Middle East as this large, just completely homogenous region. They have no internal structure. They're all sectarian countries. There are no secular countries. I'm pretty sure people think that even Turkey is a sectarian country, when we know Turkey is radically secular. Well, besides Erdogan now, but we have this picture within our culture of the Middle East as being entirely populated by radical terrorist males and oppressed women and children. Yep. And that's it.
Well, we have a great clip from Baldwin from the National Press thing in 1986 that we're going to end the show with, hopefully, if we leave ourselves about a minute and a half, that kind of clairvoyantly mentions this, or I guess it's observing it at the time also, about what you're talking about with basically homogenizing of the Middle East and our perception there. I just quickly wanted to mention also, before we get too far away from that, we absolutely have to find things to not just point out what Trump's being extreme about, but things to coalesce around. And I think some sort of nationalized healthcare, government-run healthcare is a really big one, particularly because 4 out of 10 Republicans support it. And it's something that, in my opinion, one of the things that we're really going to have to focus on in the future is who are we trying to win over, to get to show up, to get to vote, to realize our agenda. Who are we trying to get new voters? Are we trying to convert moderate Republicans? Are we trying to get people who believe in some of the more institutionalized things? Who are we after? Because who we're after, our audience is critically important to how we tailor our arguments, and I think different people will be targeting different folks.
Absolutely. And I think, I'm sorry, let me just this one point. And I think that comes down to my larger point too, right? Where it's just like we have to pinpoint why our people, and this is why we should be critiquing Obama right now, not because like we have to be, because like let's be honest, and this is not to be shame anyone, but a large portion of America has been complicit in the destabilization of the Middle East in this refugee crisis by apathy, right? Enforced apathy by the media.
I'll admit that I have not done enough, and I wasn't always aware, and that matters, you know. And I think
it matters, but we like I'll take Obama. We're not looking backwards. We're going to look forward, right? It doesn't matter where you were in 2012, and the people who are out there saying things like, well, you know, if you weren't protesting the bombing of Yemen and Sudan and Libya, you have no right to be doing this now, or you need to, you're just newly woke. Shut the hell up. But here's the thing, right? We do have to relitigate Obama's memory and his presidency for this reason, because people need, and this reason, that's why I brought up Nancy Pelosi again. We cannot allow people to think that there is a solution there. It's like we cannot allow people to believe that there is a solution in going back to the Democratic neoliberal policies, because there is not. It is not like that. That is the point in why we have to relitigate Obama's history and how these things are deeply rooted in his policies. They're way beyond them, but we have to explain. Listen, yeah, he wasn't as bad, but he wasn't nearly as bad. But he was still incredibly problematic, and we cannot go back to this. It's not nearly enough to resist Trump. To resist Trump, we have to resist neoliberalism. We can't simply resist the extreme incarnation of the problem. We have to resist the entire problem, which we used to call the status quo. But that's no longer the status quo. And listen, you're newly woke, and you don't like being harassed about where you were 2 weeks ago. Absolutely, but you have to understand, everyone needs to understand that there is simply no solution in Democrats. There's no solution in them the way they act now. If people can take over the party, absolutely, that's a different story. But there's no solution in Nancy Pelosi, because what she said, yeah, I understand all of these problems with them, all the problems we've caused, I understand them, but you don't understand. That's just the way we do things. That's just the way we do things. And sorry, just one last point. People were confused. Yeah. And I'm sorry. No,
the Green Lantern monologues. That's what tonight's show is.
No. But here's the thing: people were confused about when the Democrats gave the third way $20 million to figure out why they lost. And I was like, that's not what they paid them for. Democrats know why they lost. Like, they're not stupid. You should never believe that the Democratic establishment is stupid. Cory Booker is not stupid. Nancy Pelosi is not stupid. They know why they lost. What they want to know is, how can they win without giving up their neoliberal rhetoric? How can they win without abandoning the corporatocracy? How can they win without abandoning? And the answer is they can't. You simply can't. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, but you can. So you're good. But by the way, once again, folks, Green Lantern monologues. He'll be here every Thursday. So I want to get back to the point they talked about earlier. This idea that we just kind of dehumanize people in the Middle East, and I want to point out an exchange I've been seeing on Facebook that originally happened on Twitter about a tweet from, I want to say it was CNN, and this white dude replied with a picture of women in burqas and their arms chained together, and he said something. It was something about Iran, and I can't remember the context of his thing, but basically it was like, all the women and children are oppressed, like you said, a lot of Americans think. And a guy from Iran replied and was like, how about no? And was tweeting. It was, excuse me, the left, it had it said Iran before and after Democrats, and on the left it had Iranian women from 1970 or so. No headdress or anything like that, and just kind of hanging out and reading. And then it had that picture right next to it. But the fact of the matter is, they're real people. And he's like, you forget that. And he's like, I have people ask me all the time, is it safe to come to Iran? And I'm like, how are you asking me that when you have people with guns running around in America? He's like, you have people with guns just going out and shooting people in your country, and you're asking me if it's safe to go to Iran. He said it was Americans that, purposely overthrew our democracy because we wouldn't give out the oil in the way we wanted. But I actually want to throw this back further than that even. I want to throw this back further than America's complacency and, frankly, help in throwing over governments. I want to take this back to the era of slavery in the United States, and why in America we're so good at just dehumanizing people that happen to be Muslim, that happen to practice the Islamic faith. Did you know that about 20 to 30% of African slaves brought over were Muslims? 20 to 30% of African slaves brought over to the U.S. were Muslim, were practicing Muslims. And there was never a complete assimilation, if you will, from Islam to Christianity by these slaves. So Muslims have been in America since slavery has been in America, since black people have been in America. The first American Muslims were black. There was pseudo-Muslim societies started. The Moorish Institute for Science is the first one I can think of off the top of my head, and that was founded in, I want to say, 1929. So you've had these institutions, this ideology, this existence of the Muslim American since, again, slavery. But we're so good at dehumanizing Muslims because our dehumanization of Muslims, our islamophobia in America, is rooted in anti-blackness. And we've got hundreds of years of dehumanizing of black Americans, of black people, period. And now we're able to project that to the Middle East. So a lot of the arguments that you've seen about black people, barbaric, don't know better, will come and steal your white women, will attack you for no reason. You're seeing the same rhetoric.
Whoa. No need for personal attacks against Brandon.
You are seeing this rhetoric
Smoking
come around
again. And stealing white women.
But that's what you're seeing now coming around. You're seeing these old tropes of anti-blackness being applied to people from the Middle East. We're so good at ignoring Muslims because we've been great at ignoring black people for the last 300 years.
Well,
that's
just
a
quickly
great point. Before you get in there, Brandon, I just wanted to mention in that National Press Club video that from Baldwin, he mentions when asked a question about race relations, he mentioned he supposes the idea of White History Week, getting directly at this about teaching white people about the history of how they've done this to folks, and so that because until we do that, we're not going to be able to really move forward because they're operating from a position of almost full ignorance of how we got here regarding how it's going to be applied going forward into the Muslim community.
We can have a White History Month if they'll put it on Wet TV. White entertainment television for those of you who didn't
I get that channel. That's not what it's for. No. Okay, so yeah, you make a good point. And I think that people are also really bad at seeing the parallels in their ideology because they differ on the surface, right? I think that you have this sort of radical Christian element both in our military, which, George W. Bush, his generals called this a holy war against, the Middle East, against Islam. The Steve Bannons and Frank Gaffney, like these radical Islamophobe Pompeo, who surround Trump, this sort of anti-Christian element that is so desperate to demonize and go to war with the Middle East for some sort of revolutionary crusade. But then you also have these people, these alt-right, classical liberal people who promote this kind of secular racism, right? This racism that is, rooted in this notion that, your Bill Maher's, your what do you call it? Your Bill Maher's, your his name is escaping me. It doesn't make a difference right now. But your Dawkins, your people like that who are promoting this kind of racist agenda under the guise of secularism, right? I was like, they're just backwards. I mean, it's funny, right? Because ultimately we shifted from a position where one side where people who want to kill them, or rather want them subjugated or dominated or re-educated because they worship the wrong God, and you have people on the left, the quote unquote left, who want them to have the same thing happen to them because they worship any God. Right, or rather, a uniquely problematic God by their definition, because this homogenized notion of the Middle East as being uniquely problematic, and it's really because they don't see the parallels between each other. Right, you will have they don't understand that this is all deeply rooted in this notion of Western American supremacy, that this sort of exceptionalism, and regardless whether you're talking about your ideology is Christianity or whether it's this sort of radical new atheist. No, because it's new atheism, right? It's a sort of radical.
It is new atheist. There's new atheists.
Yeah, the new atheists. It's like this radical racist new atheism. Not that all new atheists are racist, but what I'm talking about when I say that. It's like prescription, but with different rationales. Some pseudo-philosophical, some religious, but it's the same prescription, and they don't recognize that, and it's a bit funny. Obviously, because they think that they're is deeply rooted in experience, and the experience is this: that within Western culture, within America, within a lot of these places, there has always been these designated groups okay to victimize, and it's okay to torture, and it's okay to dehumanize, and that's just the way society is, and that's the way it functions. It's okay to dehumanize brown people. Like this is a you know
I want to ask a question.
Exclusively agreed upon target. Go ahead.
I want to ask a question real quick. Do you here's my I propose this. I don't think there could be American exceptionalism without anti-blackness.
Well,
I don't think you could have. I don't think you could have it. I don't think you can have this idea that just by being American, we're so much better, because the idea of being American is the idea of whiteness, the idea that being a white Christian male is the best thing you can be. And so because that's been the majority for so long in America, at least as they viewed themselves, that all of that is based on this crutch of, at least in American ideology, anti-blackness. We've said, when you decide that one race is inferior, you enslave them, you dehumanize people, a whole group of people for 200 years. You commit genocide on the indigenous people of this nation. When you do these things, you can come and pat yourself on the. Well, look at how well I did. Look at how well I did making everybody civil. Look at how great I am.
If we were the melting pot that we like to tell ourselves that we are, I think that then you could find a place, an appropriate place for American exceptionalism, and foreign policy and all the other things that would come along with actually recognizing the humanity of all of the world's people. As of where we are now, and based on our legacy, that is, we're real far away from being able to, I think, have an American exceptionalism absent anti-blackness or just anti-other in general.
Well, here's the thing: American exceptionalism has always been a justification for colonialism, and in its various forms, right? Its various manifestations. So we're talking about colonialism as manifest destiny, colonialism as in slavery, colonialism as in the annexing of places like Guam, or fighting wars over places, over the Mexican American War. It's always been this justification for colonialism. But it wasn't until the Iraq War started that people started really, really paying attention to American imperialism. Even though before that, we still had these hundreds of military bases around the world. We still had all of these Commonwealth. American colonialism and imperialism was never really critiqued appropriately until we went into Iraq, and people started really understanding how we were extracting wealth, how America was extracting wealth from these places and colonizing them in a sort of under neocolonial exporting this sort of this hegemonic notion of American exceptionalism around the world in our culture, and sort of cultural wealth and also mineral wealth from these places. So American exceptionalism, as it exists, is two things. It's a justification for colonialism, and it's also a deeply rooted insecurity that is not unique to America, but is unique to Western culture, right? This sort of deeply, rooted insecurity about the other, and America's a better word, and how we can best expand American
folks at home. When we say America, we mean when we say the America's place in the world. The understanding of that, for those of you who might be thinking we're speaking in more general terms, is we're talking about the white male America. The idea that's what American exceptionalism boils down to. That's what American imperialism boils down to. That rich, landowning, wealthy white male. That is what they mean by American exceptionalism, and that's why I say it's based on the crux of anti-blackness. Because once you've done these things to, especially two groups of people, and I'd say anti-indigenous ideology as well, because once you've genocided the original inhabitants of one country, and then literally built the country with slave labor from another peoples from a different continent, you start thinking yourself, you have to find a way. And so we see this, and there was a great article written, I can't remember where I read it, I want to say it was Medium, that had this article about the anti-black roots of Islamophobia in America. And I've been going through that. I was like, yeah, you recognize that growing up, a lot of us are told stories about how things used to be, and a lot of us have Muslim family members. For those of you who aren't black in the audience, a lot of us say bruh. That idea that, someone else is our brother, or brothers and sisters and things like that, that comes from Islam. That stems from Islamic belief. It's so wrapped in our culture as Black Americans that we don't all the time realize it. Islamophobia in America has decidedly anti-Black roots, and I think because of that, it's imperative that the Black community especially stands up for our Middle Eastern brothers and sisters now, and our Muslim brothers and sisters across the world, regardless of what ethnicity they might be.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, we're talking about, like you said, both literal physical colonialization and also cultural, cultural domination, right? The instilling of cultural values and all other things. And you make a good point, because and that's why my point was earlier, right? That whether we're talking about neoliberalism, or rather we're talking about like this sort of radical new, not neoliberalism, actually neoliberalism about class. We're talking about this radical new atheism, or we're talking about Christianity. In a lot of ways, these are just new justifications for old ideas. They're new justifications, new philosophical underpinnings. New philosophical overpinnings for a very old idea, which is white male domination. And whether you want to guise it up as because of God said so, or because no God said so, it really becomes the same thing. But I just want to make this larger point, right? So going back to full circle, why we must engage with Obama's legacy is simply this: because he cannot be nostalgized, because we cannot be allowed to let people think that while Trump is discordant, while he's out of step, or rather he's missing a few steps, he is not an anomaly. He's not anomalous to the system. And had we kept going down this path of neoliberalism for a few more decades, I think we would have gotten to Trump, eventually. I think he would have been I think he was an eventuality. And with the issue, and why I talk about Nancy Pelosi's response is so troubling, is this: because it's obvious from her response to this communist student, because he is a communist, or he belongs to Young Democratic Socialist Society, or no, I'm sorry, he belongs to YDS. I belong to YDS. Anyway, the issue is this: it's that the Democratic establishment is more concerned with stopping the leftist insurrection within their party than they are with defeating Trump in the beginning, because they view Trump as a way to keep control over their party. And that's why a good number of them let through all 5 of his first picks, because honestly, as we talk about fighting fascism, the Democrats don't have it. There is no anti-fascist lobby in Congress. There is no anti-surveillance state lobby. There is no anti-authoritarian lobby. And that's why when it came down to voting against people, they were like, well, it's fine, right? But there are a lot of lobbies who are moving against DeVos and these other people, but we see that they will bow to this authoritarian nature, because it is not within the neoliberals' pathos to actively resist neo-fascism, because they understand that it's not, neo-fascism is not the end of neoliberalism. It's just the ultimate conclusion of it, and neoliberalism is the precursor to neo-fascism. And so we have to be wary of the Democratic establishment trying to stamp out all leftism. But I think we have to call it there and say good night, because we're going to move into the Benjamin Dixon Show. Please, if you enjoyed the show, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to our channel, subscribe. Stay tuned for the Benjamin Dixon Show, which is coming up on this exact same channel. Someone will drop a link in the chat. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brandon Sutton. I am one of many hosts for this show. You can follow me on Twitter right where it says here. And say goodbye, fellas.
I appreciate you folks sitting with us tonight. If you see something interesting, please send it to me on Twitter. Get a hold of me. I'd love to talk to more folks there. I've not been super active lately, but I have college and I have another midterm coming up next week. So,
thanks everyone for watching. I also just wanted to quickly plug on a similar topic. Wendy Muse has a great article on theprogressivearmy.com. This is not a coup, talking about Donald Trump, and to be careful about basically where we use calling this Trump's America. A lot of the points that we were talking about tonight regarding the underpinnings or the things that came before Trump. Finally, we have the video from Baldwin from the National Press Club, and with that, we'll call that our moment of sanity. And just give me a moment quickly to get it up, and we will be out here.
It's something that rendered is important, is that out of this endeavor, what we call the white American has created only the nigger he wants to see. The reason that's important and terrifying and corrupts the youth here is because when this same white man looks around the world, he sees only the nigger he wants to see. And that is mortally dangerous for the future of this country, for our present fortunes. The world is full of all kinds of people who live quite beyond the confines of the American imagination and who have nothing whatever to do with the guilt-ridden vision of the world which controls so much of our life and our thinking, and which paralyzes very nearly our moral sense. We are living in a world in which everybody and everything is interdependent. It is not white, this world. It is not black either. The future of this world depends on everyone in this room. And that future depends on to what extent and by what means we liberate ourselves from a vocabulary which now cannot bear the weight of reality. Thank you.